What's up, everybody? Welcome to Fantasy Football. Today, DFS. We've only got 3 more games. We got 4 more teams. We've got Meg Shop. We've got Mike McClure. Meg, I'm always feeling, and I've said this before, a little sad. It feels like, we've entered the weekend, but it's the Sunday. It's the late, early evening Sunday, and Monday's right around the corner because football season's about to end. How you feeling?
Yeah, we talk about this the last few weeks. I hate the end of football season, football girl year round, but it'll be a fun end of the football season, and then I'll just get back in the basketball streets to cope.
Mike, normally when we're doing this show or any of the shows that we do, it's always Kansas City in the conversation. But Meg and I get to have our team in the Final Four finally for the first time in what feels like 30 years because it is 30 years. How you feeling today?
I'm feeling great. I'm excited for the Commanders as well. A team that I won't say I adopted them throughout the year, but definitely followed them very closely with some of the excitement there and thought there was a lot of potential. So I'm very excited to see them here. Dare I say, Jaden Daniels is the best quarterback in the NFC. If he wins this game, there will be zero doubt that he's the best rookie of all time at any position. So I am very, very much fired up to watch that game.
Yeah, I'm in on both of those takes. This conversation today, it's going to be, we're going to break down both games, but Meg, I think when we have 2 games, it really, especially when we have 2 games and there's going to be some very popular game scripts and players, I feel like we need to kind of thread the needle here because we can't just pick the best. I filled out a lineup last night and it was like perfect. I had $0 left and I had every single person I wanted in there. And it was like probably like the lineup that I made. I wasn't trying to do this. It was probably the chalkiest lineup anybody could have possibly made. And so I think we have to be weary of that. Even in the smaller contests, people are going to kind of gravitate to certain players. So I think when we talk about these games, before we get into Commanders Eagles, it's all about contrarian plays, yes. Contrarian constructions, yes. But also contrarian game scripts. I feel like the contrarian game script side of this might be sort of the path to go, where let's say they think, it's going to be this type of game and you just kind of go the opposite. Anyway, I don't know if you've made any lineups, but how are you approaching this?
Yeah, similar to you, of course, your first runs, your first builds do feel pretty chalky. But then from there, I think you can just kind of flip certain pieces or flip, like you said, certain types of builds. Okay. Instead of 2 tight ends, I'm going to do 3 running backs or, again, play the defense against the quarterback. You can do unique stuff within, kind of editing that first chalky lineup, so to speak. And that's why I think I'm going to try to do. But I also think you made a great point that, we're having the conversation that it's all about like building off different potential game scripts. And I think that's a way to get more contrarian here.
Mike, in a 2-game slate, does that take priority for you, or is it just a matter of roster construction and just really like kind of going all in on maybe a popular game script, but like on an onslaught where people aren't going to stack as much as you're going to stack?
Yeah, I think that it's one where you definitely can make certain stands and don't be afraid to go all in on them. I think that there's different scenarios out there, basically like the example with Saquon's a little different, but like looking at Kansas City, if Kareem Hunt is RB2 on the slate, that's not going to be surprising at all, right? It wouldn't, at least I don't think it should be to anyone, right? So like projecting Kareem Hunt over a guy like James Cook or something like that is very, very viable. We did it the last week where I had a lot of success with Derrick Henry, essentially projecting someone over Henry, things like that. So you definitely, if you've got little leans, it's okay to take really drastic stances on them. And then just make sure you're building lineups that are correlated to whatever stance you want to take.
Yeah, totally makes sense. We've got a lot of people in the chat. James, Grey Goose Hayes, Jake is in here, Kirk, Moshi. I'm sure I'm leaving some. Alan is in here. All of you, I love the comments. Love that you all appreciate this show, that you're going to miss it when it's gone. I don't know if we have a show next week, but we certainly have a show for the Super Bowl in 2 Thursdays. Greg Gousset says this season reminds me a lot of the RG3 season before he got hurt. Yeah, I think that's a totally fair comp. Obviously, we think Jaden Daniels might be a different caliber quarterback, but it does feel like that type of season. All right, let's get into the Commanders and the Eagles. Meg, I'm going to start with you. When I was talking about the chalky builds, I mean, everybody's going to play Saquon, and we'll have the Saquon conversation in a second. Let's just table the do we all have to play Saquon conversation. He's 8,600, which is not that expensive under the circumstances, obviously. I think a lot of people, before they even figure out their stack, I think they're going to be like, all right, I'm punching in Saquon. What's the next move? And I do think for a lot of people, even though this is a great defense, the next move is Jaden Daniels with 1 or 2 pass catchers. And oh, look, De'Ami Brown's only 4,400. People are going to want to jam him in. And Terry McLaurin's 6,700, which really, again, isn't that expensive because there's a lot of cheap options on this slate, which we'll get to. I can bring up Austin Eckler, Olamide Zaccheaus. Maybe he bounces back. Jamison Crowder's only 3,100. Of course, Zach Ertz is 4,300. Is it as easy as Jaden and a couple pass catchers and Saquon? Like, how are you playing this?
Well, I certainly am going to do a lineup with a Jaden Daniels stack and running it back with Saquon. I think there you definitely need to find ways to have some contrarian pieces in your lineup because, as you said, I do think that is going to be kind of the air quotes chalky build. But yeah, when I do Jaden Daniels stacks, I like him with Eckler a lot. He didn't play in the second matchup. He played in the first matchup, and he was targeted massively as a receiver. Had I think 8 catches for 89 yards, something along those lines. So I definitely like Eckler here. He comes with a little ownership, but nothing crazy. I think Ertz is in play. He's gotten a ton of red zone looks. I believe he scored 7, touchdowns in the last. 7 or 8 games. I mean, he's had a lot of red zone looks all season, but also a ton of red zone touchdowns recently. So I think Ertz is fair. So if you want to do like Eckler Ertz as opposed to the receivers, I think that's maybe a unique combo with Jaden Daniels. But I certainly don't mind if you wanted to do Zaccheaus or McLaurin, obviously. And then I will say, I meant De'Ami Brown or McLaurin. Zaccheaus is running less routes in the playoffs. Yeah. So he's coming with less ownership, but do you take the risk that he will get more looks, he will get more routes? That's a risk, but that's the kind of stands we make here when we're trying to get ownership leverage.
Yeah, Mike, it's interesting on Zaccheaus because he's been on the field. He did get a little nicked up last game, but he came back, and I feel like they're using him as a blocker more than anything else, and that's sort of why he's on the field a lot. He's just not getting targeted. I think Jamison Crowder, if you really wanted to get contrarian, is interesting because he's on the field and he's not getting a lot of targets, but he's a guy that absolutely could score a touchdown and just can get lost in the shuffle here. How are you attacking the Washington side? Is it Jaden and stack him with 3 guys and maybe including Austin Eckler, or is it maybe Jaden and you don't play Terry McLaurin, but you play some of the other pass catchers?
Yeah, I think the answer to the question really comes down to what you like in the Buffalo game, Buffalo Kansas City game, as far as where you're stacking. I do like Jaden at quarterback a lot for some pretty obvious reasons. When I'm talking about stack partners, though, it looks like probably Austin Eckler is going to be my favorite piece just because he is going to be involved in the ground game. I expect him to be heavily involved in the passing game. And then I think that, again, they're probably competitive and neutral or trailing most of the way. And if you get into the trailing stuff, that is where Austin Eckler, I think, is going to absolutely shine. So when I look at my builds with Jaden Daniels here, it's mostly a lot of Austin Eckler. And not getting, crazy exposure. But some of that is like, I want to play Saquon, who's taken up some salary. I think you have an interesting decision whether you want to play Travis Kelce or AJ Brown as another spend. And then just some of the cheaper receivers on the Kansas City side are popping a little more from me.
Yeah.
And I think that when I just play Jaden Daniels and Austin Eckler, I can get exposure to a lot of the offense on the Washington side. You're obviously exposed if Robinson has rushing touchdowns, but I don't think that's the way that the Commanders win this game personally. So I'm willing to take that risk and essentially fade him. So for me right now, it looks like mostly just Daniels and Eckler is really with Saquon. And then that's really kind of it for me. It's just going to be a real simple Daniels to Eckler.
Mike, let's have the Saquon Barkley and Eagles conversation. I mean, again, Barkley's 8,600, which might sound expensive to some people, but obviously points per dollar, like it's not expensive at all. With that said, this is a unique situation, in my opinion, where, I mean, it's so hard to avoid Saquon. I mean, his rushing prop's 130, his combo prop is over 140. With that said, I mean, you got a 2-game slate and everybody's treating Saquon Barkley. I know we use free square for like 4K guys, but I mean, this does feel like a free square to people because I don't think people are going to think, hey, I want to fade Saquon. Is that, if you're playing 5 lineups, is there cause to maybe think, hey, Saquon doesn't get there and you fade him?
I don't think so, honestly. See, I'm going to play him at 100%. He's going to be 85+% owned in this. It's very similar to me where we had Henry against Pittsburgh in the not last round, but the round before that.
Yeah.
Just one of those situations where the salary works. It's not hard. So I'm going to play Saquon in every lineup. And it's really just the fact that the other teams on the slate are almost all running back by committee. And what I mean by that is we know that it is that case for Washington and Kansas City. And Buffalo, I'll make the argument that it is, because if you go look at rushing props, Josh Allen is treated as a running back in this one. Josh Allen and James Cook rushing yardage props are 6 yards apart for this game. Josh Allen's going to run the football 12 times minimum in this game. So like, I think it's because it's committee, you're basically just betting on touchdown variance only. There's no reason to fade Saquon here.
Uwe2K says, if you fade Saquon, I think you're drawing dead. I mean, that's a completely fair comment. It almost feels like the only way Saquon doesn't get there is if somehow he like pulls a hamstring or something.
Yeah, it's an injury. It's an injury situation. Like even the scenario he doesn't get in the end zone and Hurts gets all the rushing touchdowns, I would be stunned if he didn't have 80 to 100 yards and 2 catches, and still like that 10 points might lead all running backs on the slate if James Cook doesn't score. Yeah,
Meg, it's interesting because Saquon could quote fail or not get there, but because of what Mike said about the other running backs on the slate, he still could easily be in the optimal lineup. With that said, are you considering, when you look at Jalen Hurts numbers in terms of like the prop market, I'm not even just talking this week, I'm talking last week, the last couple of weeks, it's like crazy how low these numbers are. Like last week, it was around 200 yards. He didn't get there. His completions prop last week was 17.5, attempts was 25.5. It's even lower this week, which kind of speaks to me. Would you consider, again, let's say you're making 5 single entry lineups, would you consider a Jalen Hurts stack, or are you just like, I'm not wasting my money, I'm going to Jaden or going to this Bills KC game?
Yes, I would. I am surprised looking at ownership at this point that he's not coming in lower. I thought going into before I looked at ownership that, okay, if you want to get contrarian, do a Jalen Hurts stack. But he's coming in the same ownership as Josh Allen. So you're not really getting the ownership leverage there. However, I think it's the kind of the build structure. And this is not, it's like, close your ears for you and I, but if it really went bad for Washington and if the Eagles just, let's be honest, Detroit still put up 400 yards, 31 points and 400 yards or something. So it's like, they could still get there. Hopefully, we're competitive or we win, but they could still get there. Or if it is unfortunately a blowout and you just want to overstack the Eagles, Hurts, Brown, Saquon, another Goddard, something like that, that might be the unique way to build around that. So as much as it grosses me out, I may do one lineup like that because I think that's the more contrarian way to approach Hurts with Saquon.
Mike, that's an interesting point, having Hurts with Saquon, obviously, and just capturing all those points, and they could both get a couple of touchdowns. We know Washington defense, like they're kind of bend, don't break, but there comes a point where they potentially break and they just allow a ton of yards and through the air and through the ground. If you were playing Jalen Hurts, would it be with Saquon and one of the pass catchers on this 2-game slate?
It would, and it would also be the defense. So actually a couple weeks ago, we didn't talk about because I wasn't on that show there, but the round where it was the wild card round with Houston and Stroud, like I played Houston stack. My lineup that won, I took down a tournament, the GPP, big score actually. I had Stroud, Mixon, Collins, Schultz, and the Texans defense all in the same lineup, which ended up being relatively unique because not a lot of people, you're not going to get that with a hand build generally, right? But I project this as a similar spot. I project this as one that, the consensus is that Washington is probably not as far off as the spread indicates at 6. So I think that a lot of builds are going to look to the Commanders side with Saquon. I think there is definitely a case to be made. Now, the case that I would make the first 3 in would be Hurts, obviously Saquon, and then that Eagles defense. It's going to be something correlated to just ground and pound the entire way for the Eagles. That's the scenario where I would build. And as far as another player in there is enough action in the Kansas City game that I'm not going to force pass catchers in. The one that I could force in would actually be Goddard, knowing that I would also be playing Travis Kelce anyway, in a double tight end build. But long story short, very much interested in a Jalen Hurts lineup still, because 1 or 2 tush pushes and you're there.
Let's rank the following 3 that we haven't talked about too much. You did just mention Dallas Goedert. But Meg, I'll start with you, and price is considered here, right? So AJ Brown, 6,800, Devontae Smith, 5,800, Dallas Goedert, 4,500. How do you rank those 3 in terms of likelihood that you're going to play them?
Even though AJ Brown is coming at incredibly high, pretty high ownership, he's getting a really high target share, and he had a couple drops last week. There were some callbacks last week, so it would be AJ Brown, Goddard, Devonta Smith for me.
Mike,
it's tough. It depends on your lineup build, like your construction, right, and how you see the game. If you think the Eagles win this game easily, it would be AJ Brown for me, because I think it's just like you hit the home run ball and ultimately get there. Now, if you think Washington can win this game, like if you really believe Washington can win this game, Devonta Smith would be number one for me. And the scenario in which the Eagles lose this game or the Commanders win it is maybe one where Jalen Hurts is actually limited in terms of some of his mobility, where he's not able to create and hit some of those big shots. It's going to be more volume, talking like slants over the middle of the field to Devontae. But that's only going to come in the situation where we're like truly neutral or trailing. So you need to have potentially Jaden Daniels and Austin Eckler on one side, and then Saquon and Devontae on the other side would be kind of the build that I'd look to at that point. Now, as we talked about all that, I think you could do that same Eagles onslaught without Jalen Hurts. So I think you could play AJ, Saquon, the defense, and Goddard with a different quarterback, whether it be Mahomes, Allen, or Jaden. I think that is a very viable build here as well.
Yeah, and again, I think you bring up a good point on the front end of that comment. You got to at least consider alternate game scripts where maybe Washington's playing from the lead, which they were against Detroit. Nobody thought that was going to happen. So what does that game look like if they're playing from a lead? Maybe it's like a 10-point lead. Maybe something crazy happens. Like who knows what it is, but I think those lineups aren't going to really be built. So those have to be in play for you too if you're making a few lineups here. Before we move on to the next game, are we in or out on 4,300 Zach Ertz, Meg?
I think I'm in. It's definitely in my player pool. How often I'll get there, I'm not sure, but I'm in. He's getting a ton of red zone looks.
That's right. Mike, in or out on Zach?
I would say definitely in the player pool. I am admittedly going to target Travis Kelce again. He looked a lot better last week. Buffalo's been atrocious in the secondary as well. So you're getting the discount. Keep in mind on Travis Kelce, like in previous years, he'd be 7,500 right now, 8K. He's a flat 6K, and so is his quarterback, Patrick Mahomes. It's just like you've never seen this combo cheap like this. So he's going to be priority number one, but I do have a decent amount of Zach Ertz popping up here.
All right, Lee Price in the chat. He says, Hurts rushing yard prop down about 10 yards from the historical average. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense, especially under his current possible injury circumstances. And by the way, I mentioned his passing yards prop. It looks like it's universally in that low 180s range, which is incredibly low. Just so everybody knows, Jaden Daniels is in that anywhere between like 221 and 225, 226. Josh Allen in that 230 range, and Patrick Mahomes just over 250. Those are just passing yards, not combo passing and rushing. All right. We do have to talk about a little bit of rushing because we're going to end up talking about some Josh Allen and Patrick. He runs a little bit, especially in games like this. We're going to cover KC and Buffalo right after this message from our partners. We're back on Fantasy Football Today, DFS. If you're watching us over on Twitter, jump over to the Fantasy Football Today YouTube page and get in the chat. Let us know what you think about some of these plays, about some of these games. And by the way, so many compliments in here about the show. If you haven't already reviewed the podcast, go to Apple, Spotify, wherever you review podcasts. Hit 5 stars, say a couple words. It takes, honestly, about 7 or 8 seconds tops. I mean, I'm not even exaggerating that point. All right, Buffalo and Kansas City. Well, Meg, we started with you when we were talking about your favorite team. So now we're going to start with Mike when we talk about his favorite team, who always happens to be in this. Is it like did I hear this stat wrong? Is it like 7 AFC championships in a row? I heard that wrong, right? That's not true.
It's truly unbelievable, the success. But you know what? I think your Commanders could be blessed with the same thing heading here. I think they're in a really, really good spot. As far as this game, I'm definitely playing Mahomes lineups. So Buffalo, it's interesting. I mentioned it on the early edge, an hour ago, right? So, yeah. So when I look at this Buffalo team, In terms of EPA per play defensively, they're the worst team in the playoffs. They're still alive, but they're the worst team in the playoffs defensively here. And it's all because of the pass. Since week 11, they are down to 29th in the NFL in EPA per dropback. That's a problem because Kansas City doesn't want to take the ball out of Patrick Mahomes' hands. He's going to throw the ball. When you look at these competitive games, Kansas City's throwing the ball just over 70% of the time. It's really not balanced at all. And when I look at this matchup here, we were talking about low price points. Again, Patrick Mahomes, flat 6K. Travis Kelce, a flat 6K. That combination used to be 8K and 8K. You're getting a $2,000 discount off of where they were. Now, they haven't played like how they had in years past until very, very recently in this last game. And this is a spot where in a matchup that I think Buffalo is going to surrender enough yards that you're just getting a massive discount here. And if you want to throw in Xavier Worley, he's 5,500. Like that stack with a double stack, you can easily play Saquon. You can essentially play whatever you want, right? So Mahomes will definitely be my top quarterback, despite surrendering some of the massive ceiling to a guy like Josh Allen in the rushing department.
Yeah, Meg, we'll toggle back and forth between these two teams, but I think one route where Patrick Mahomes doesn't get there and Kansas City pass catchers don't. I mean, Kansas City pass catchers are kind of a finicky thing outside of Travis Kelce. So we'll talk about that in terms of the value and upside of Xavier Worthy and Marquise Brown, maybe guys like D-Hop as well. But on the Bills side, I think the way the Bills win the game and the way that Patrick Mahomes doesn't get there really in any statistical category is if Josh Allen and guys like James Cook hold on to the ball. And Khalil Shakir, who doesn't really get downfield, he's more of a just like we're going to throw it 10 yards down the field to Khalil Shakir. He's going to catch it and, the clock's going to continue to run. I feel like playing that narrative is actually really interesting with, of course, maybe some KC runbacks. Do you like the Bills side at all?
I like Josh Allen for sure. Overstacking the Bills is hard for me just because of the routes they run, the targets. It's just not consistent. So for me, I love Josh Allen here. You're paying up for it, but you're getting the ownership discount. He's like I said, it's he and Hurts have the lowest ownership among the four quarterbacks. Now it's not like you're getting massive ownership leverage, but you're getting a little. And I think potentially, obviously, Josh Allen has like the best floor ceiling combo on the slate. So I know lately they're more run heavy, but as we saw last week, he contributes to that running game. He had 2 rushing touchdowns last week. He's historically played the Chiefs very well. I definitely think this could be a punch back and forth type game. So I do like Allen. I'm not going to overstack it. And I definitely like targeting a tight end. I'm actually going to take the ownership leverage there. And I like stacking him with Knox, the cheap tight end who's coming in at sub 10% ownership. We know you can attack Chiefs through the tight end position, but Kincaid and Knox, they run about the same routes. Knox actually ran more routes last week. They had, both had 2 catches. In the game where Kincaid missed, it was against these Chiefs. Knox had, I believe, 4 catches for 40 yards. That's only 8 DK points. But if he finds the end zone and you're getting him at sub 10% ownership, that's where I like it. So I kind of like the Allen Knox, fill in some Chiefs run backs. Obviously Kelce and we can talk about others, but I'm not overstacking it. I certainly think if you want to go outside of Shakir, you get massive ownership leverage on the Bills receivers, but good luck picking. I mean, that's for people who are mass entering. And if you want to allocate certain percent to each Bills receiver, you're getting massive ownership leverage on those receivers, but I couldn't begin to try to predict which one would be the one you'd try to play.
It's really interesting you say that because it's, we think of DFS as gambling in some sense, but you're purely, truly gambling with that rotation of receivers. But that's not necessarily a bad thing on a 2-game slate. If you happen to hit, if you grab Keon Coleman and he grabs a 70-yard touchdown, a couple of the catch, whatever it is, you can get there. Let me ask you this. If you're going to gamble, and Mike, I'm going to ask the same question to you, and then we're going to get to the KC receivers. If you're going to gamble on a receiver, forget about the tight ends, a receiver outside of Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman, Mac Hollins, I feel like those are and Curtis Samuel maybe are the top candidates, with Amari Cooper being like trailing in last place. Amari happens to be the only one in the 4K range. The other 3 are in the 3K range. Are there 2 receivers you would, if you were making a handful of lineups, you gamble on?
It's just so hard for me. I'd maybe take a shot on Curtis Samuel. We saw him kind of pop a couple weeks ago, kind of manufactured touches. But it's guessing. It's a major guesswork.
I think it's Curtis Samuel too. And again, I think if the game plan is let's keep Pat Mahomes off the field, let's keep this clock rolling. It's a lot of short area passes to Khalil, to Curtis Samuel, and then get James Cook and Josh Allen involved in the running game. Mike, do you have an opinion on these Buffalo pass catchers?
Yeah, I'm not playing any of them other than Shakir and Knox.
Yeah, that's an opinion.
Curtis Samuel would be the guy, though. You're dead on there. And the reason for that is they can manufacture touches, as Meg mentioned. He can catch the ball around the line of scrimmage. He's relatively difficult to tackle in space. And that's frankly why he's been, an asset to the team, or at least they thought he would be, and why they brought him in, right? So I'm only playing Shakir and Knox. I've got one lineup that I love. I think it's going to be heavily duped. That's the problem you run into on a 2-game slate. But yeah, it's those two and move on. I would much rather save over Curtis Samuel. I'd rather save the 900 with Knox, play him at flex, pair him with Kelsey, and kind of move on.
All right, so talk to me about some of the KC guys, Mike. Kareem Hunt is 5,400. We talked about how some of the running backs are such a drop-off after Barkley. Kareem Hunt or James Cook in your builds, who are you finding more of in your builds? I assume it's Kareem Hunt.
Yeah, a little bit more Hunt versus Cook. Cook, the price point's just nuts at 7K, essentially 6,900. It's a little much considering how much I think Josh Allen's going to take priority, particularly in the red zone. Now, if you're in the camp that thinks Kansas City struggles offensively, then I think that Cook is a phenomenal play. I think he's a great play at that point. I think Kansas City is going to score points here. And I think that we've seen the other running backs. Someone just mentioned Ty Johnson. You got Davis as well. I think that they mix in those backs a little bit as well. So to me, this is not a great spot to play him. I have more interest in Hunt. I think the more interesting question is, what do you do with Hunt versus Eckler? Because Austin Eckler he's got a ton of, ceiling and upside in terms of catching passes. But Hunt does seem to potentially get those goal line carries. So it's that's going to be the toughest call for me, is doing that, because there's a lineup that I like here. I'm going to read it off. I don't normally share a full lineup. I'm going to read it off. It's Mahomes, Barkley, Hunt, Worthy, Shakir, AJ Brown, Travis Kelce, Dawson Knox, and the Eagles. Notice that has 0 Washington Commanders in it. You could obviously play Eckler over Hunt, but for me, it would be that Kansas City onslaught where it's Mahomes, Hunt, Worthy, Kelce. That's a lineup that I'm looking at playing here right now.
Yeah, I think it's really important that you brought up James Cook, and the only way he's like super viable is if Buffalo is kind of dominating this game somehow from the outset. And again, I think these alternative narratives are something to potentially build for, because this is only a 2-point spread. It's not like Kansas City's favored by 10 here. Like, that is absolutely in play. Patrick Mahomes seems to never have a bad playoff game, but it's in play at least. And then all of a sudden it becomes the Josh Allen and James Cook show, and you can build for that. Like, I can think of some lineups where I'd have James Cook featured in this game in a potential Buffalo positive game script, and everything else goes to that other game, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 pieces. Like, I think you can build for those alternative narratives, and on a 2-game slate, I feel like you should do that. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the real thing it probably comes down to is Cook versus AJ Brown. And I know they play different positions, but it's a 2-game slate. I think that's the decision that ultimately can decide a lot of these contests this week. Whether it's AJ gets in the end zone, gets that 100-yard bonus potentially, and Cook. So for me, I think that that's the toughest decision, but I am leaning towards still potentially including AJ Brown here over Cook.
All right, Mike, I'm going to ask you this, and then Meg, I'm going to ask you this. The pass catches for Kansas City. Xavier Worthy, 5,500, seems like a pretty good price. Marquise Brown kind of fell flat last week, but had some potential. He's only 4,200. Are they making it into your builds? And is there any other KC pass catcher outside of Kelsey that would be making those builds?
Yeah, Xavier Worthy's wide receiver 1 for me on the entire slate. He's just simply too talented in the way that they can use him. Buffalo's been, as I mentioned, atrocious in the secondary. He's so difficult to cover because of the speed. And the thing that I like to point out on him is, while, yes, it's happened many times, and we hope it gets better at some point, if you go back and watch Kansas City play, we're missing probably like 8 massive Xavier Worthy highlights that didn't count because he had half a foot out of bounds because he lost track of where he was. And that's just things that happened, as a rookie in the league, right? But he's, right there on some massive, massive plays, and they're going to continue to give him the football. So for me, he is clearly wide receiver 1, really for me on this entire slate, regardless of price, in terms of wanting to put him in my lineup.
An emphasis on wide receiver there, because Meg, when you look at the receiving yards props across the four teams, Travis Kelce actually leads the way, as you two know, and it's close depending on where you look. It's in that 70 range. And just so everybody knows, Terry is in the 65 range, and I'm ballparking it because books are different across, across books. It's a little different. AJ Brown 60, then you got Khalil Shakir 55, Xavier Worthy 49, and then you got Devontae Smith after that in the high 40s as well. Meg, you think you're playing Xavier Worthy as well? Because when I built that super chalky lineup, Xavier Worthy was definitely one of my first clicks because I think Mike's right. Like, first of all, he's getting a lot of work anyway, especially nowadays, but we know he's viable for that long catch in that long run or that end around that goes to the house. So Xavier Worthy in your lineups. And is there any other pass catcher for KC that you like outside of Travis Kelce?
Yeah, I'm with you and Mike. Worthy is an early click. Maybe it's not the very first one, but it's an early click for me. And I see him in most of my lineups for sure. Outside of, obviously, Kelce is as well. But outside of that, I don't know that I'm forcing it. Marquise Brown did run the routes. His routes went up last week, but only had 2 targets, didn't get there, didn't get bring it in. So could he this week? Absolutely. But you're not getting any ownership leverage by going to that because I'm still seeing him at around 50% ownership. So you are getting ownership discount on Hopkins, but he's not really, at least last week, didn't run the routes. Maybe that changes this week. So I'd say if you wanted ownership leverage, you could try Hopkins and hope he runs more routes, gets like an end zone target. And I don't fault you if you do want to, stack with Hollywood Brown too. We know he can be explosive as well. But my priorities are definitely kind of the chalky ones in Kelce and Worthy.
Yeah. And again, some of this stuff is going to be chalky, and building with contrarian pieces or just some onslaught stacks that you don't think people are going to do. Contrarian builds, and again, contrarian game scripts, I think are really, really important this week. Well, listen, we don't have, Mike, anything else to follow up on this game, because I wanted to discuss cheat sheets and top threes, but we're not going to have official plays in that capacity because it's just the 2-game slate. But I do want to talk about some of our favorite plays. Anything left on this Kansas City Buffalo game?
Don't be, one thing I'm considering as well. I know we like Knox. I actually might have a dual tight end build that's Kelce and Noah Gray. Both of them. I just think there are ways that Kelce can get there through sheer volume. Noah Gray can get there in the red zone, as we've seen a couple times. So that's one build that I'm considering, especially where I'm playing Mahomes, Worthy, Kelce, and not the running backs. That's a build that I'm strongly considering here. And I don't think anyone plays Noah Gray for 400 more than Dawson Knox here.
That's interesting. So it would be in at least a lineup, you would have Patrick Mahomes, Worthy, Kelce, and Noah Gray.
Yep.
I will say this, because I was looking at Patrick Mahomes' passing yards prop, which again is around 252, but his completions prop is 24.5. And I think it might even be juiced a little bit to the over. That is an incredibly high completions prop. So to your point, Mike, in terms of like leaving the ball in Patrick Mahomes' hands,
100%.
That's what they're going to do. So, you could have Noah Gray at 3K with easily a few catches in this type of atmosphere.
Yeah, I mean, to the point, again, it's not a full slate. Like at a flex spot at 3K right there, 3 catches, 36 yards it might be enough on this slate.
Very, very interesting. All right, Meg, listen, you did fill out a cheat sheet. I didn't, because I'm just kind of freewheeling it on today's show. But with that said, let's talk about some of your favorite plays in terms of, and you've kind of given your opinion on all these games, but like if you had to pick a favorite stack and a chalk buy, chalk fade, contrarian value, what do you like?
Sure. Yeah. We talked about Josh Allen. He's played the Chiefs well. So coming in a little ownership, doing Josh Allen with Dawson Knox for the ownership leverage at the tight end position. Of course, I know a lot of us are probably running double tight end builds. Chalk by, of course, Saquon. We talked that through. Obviously, 2 matchups against Washington, 300 yards, 4 touchdowns. I'm going to go back there. Chalk fade. I put Shakir just because, he doesn't have that touchdown equity like some of these other receivers. So, if you're just fading a 6 for 60, which has kind of been what a lot of Shakir games are, then I can dodge that. And, maybe I do, after talking this through, take a stab on like Curtis Samuel if I did want to run a second Bills piece. Contrarian, I put Dawson Knox and Kareem Hunt. Dawson Knox is sub 10%. I believe Kareem Hunt is around 20% or lower. So that's low on a 2-game slate. Yeah. And Mike talked through that. And I definitely have some interest in Kareem Hunt. I actually had a follow-up question for you and Mike about 3 running back builds versus 2 tight end builds. But Kareem Hunt is definitely in consideration, whether you're playing him over Eckler or Cook or just as a third running back. And then value, I'll just stick with the whole Dawson Knox thing. You're getting 2.6K tight end and hoping he gets in the end zone, basically.
Mike, and any response to what Meg just kind of referenced in terms of, are a lot of your builds 3 running backs, and how much of 2 tight ends are you having?
Yeah, I got a lot of 2 tight end initially. I think that the 2 running backs, like if you don't play 3 running backs, you leave yourself very exposed, which I'm okay with personally. I'm okay with taking that risk. But if there's a scenario where James Cook scores multiple touchdowns, I can assure you that I'm not winning this week, right?
Mhm.
So because you're going to need them, you're going to need Cook and Barkley for sure at that point. So I'm leaning more towards the 2 tight end build than the 3 running back build. So that's just where I'm leaning there, which I'll tell you, Cook is the guy that I'm not playing for the most part.
Fair enough. All right. Mike, I do want to ask you about some of your maybe favorite pieces at each position, not necessarily a top 3, kind of where you think you're going to go all in on with some of these stacks and whatnot. But I'll say my stack is going to be the same stack that I had last week. It's Jaden Daniels and De'Ami Brown. And by the way, Uwe2K says a Commanders onslaught. We have to remember that the Commanders in that game where they won, and granted, they beat Kenny Pickett, they threw for 5. Jaden Daniels threw for 5 touchdown passes, if memory serves. They also had 5 turnovers in that game. I guess the point being is no matter how good this Eagles defense is, there is the possibility that Washington puts up a lot of points, just like they did against Detroit. I understand 2 different defenses, but I think the onslaught is really, really interesting. And I think you could make the argument that you get a lot of players in that game, including Saquon Barkley on the other side. And you say to yourself, it's just going to be, dink and dunk on the Kansas City side, grab Kelsey and grab James Cook and just hope that it's really just a running game for the Buffalo Bills. So I think that type of narrative is certainly in play. As far as my chalk buy, it is probably going to be Saquon. My chalk fade, I agree with you. It's not going to, it's going to be Shakir. I think he's an okay play, but I just think the upside is a little limited, especially when some of these other receivers can get peppered in, particularly down the field. Contrarian play, I don't really have one. So I think Noah Gray, I'm certainly convinced there from Mike. And then there's just plenty of value plays that we talked about on the board. I think you could go back to Hollywood Brown, but I think there's plenty in that Washington game and even some chances to take potentially on a Curtis Samuel in the Buffalo Bills game. All right, Mike, how about just some stacks you like and maybe a couple of core pieces that most of your builds have?
Yeah, I'll say every build will have Saquon, Worthy, and Kelsey. Those will be the top 3 pieces that'll for sure be in every lineup. I'll play Noah Gray a little bit as a little bit of a contrarian stance, only doing that with Mahomes at quarterback. I'm not sprinkling. If you're looking for a cheap tight end in a non-Mahomes lineup, it would be Knox for me. Mm-hmm. I only want Noah Gray with Patrick Mahomes because the scenario that Noah Gray goes off, I think it's Patrick Mahomes has multiple touchdowns. I don't think it's Noah Gray catches the only Patrick Mahomes touchdown. So that's how I'm building that. As far as running backs, it's a toss-up right now for me. I'm leaning Kareem Hunt still. I see a question in the chat. Who will be the pass-catching back for Kansas City? I think Kareem Hunt is the back that they trust the most. Samaje Perine is in there in pass protection a bit on third down, but when the game's on the line, if it is on the line, I think Kareem Hunt is the guy that's going to get the looks. So I'm leaning there. We talked not enough about Buffalo, and that was my fault there. I think Ty Johnson is interesting in the scenario that Buffalo falls behind and it is trailing. So if you need some salary savings, I could see that being viable. And then the other guy that I still like Devontae Smith a little bit, but again, that's only in Jaden Daniels lineups, only in the scenario where Washington is really, really, really pushing.
Very, very interesting. Build for the narrative. One last question before we get out of here. Meg, I'm going to ask both of you this. Meg, I'm going to start with you. The team most likely to go over their implied total, and I'll give you each team's implied total. Washington, just under 21. So let's just call it 21. Eagles, just under 27. So we'll call it 27. So Washington, 21, Eagles, 27, the Chiefs, 24, and the Bills, 23. Team most likely to go over their implied total.
Oh, this is tough. I think this could actually be a higher scoring game in the Chiefs Buffalo. So don't get mad at me, Mike, but I'm going to say Bills on this one. I'm going to say that I see them going over 23.5.
Okay, Mike, same question for you.
Yeah, I think the answer is probably the Bills or Kansas City. I think it's that game for me. And the only reason I say that is I think that Philly can have enough success on the ground that they just really limit possessions in that game. is what I could see happening. So, and and that goes the same way. I think Washington can move the ball, but I don't think they're hitting 60-yard home run balls in this game. I think it's moving the football down the field. So I'll say Buffalo only because of the key number, right? 24 is super key. They're listed at 23.5. Like the scenario that Buffalo lands on 24, I think is probably likely here. Now, where does the 24 come from? I feel better about where the 24 comes from on the Kansas City side. So I like in DFS, I like the Kansas City side a lot more here.
All right. It's such a good point about Washington. Don't expect to see what you saw last week. I mean, I know they did that against the Eagles to some degree when they played Kenny Pickett and company, but you had such a banged up defense. And then Amik Robertson, their best defensive back, went out within like 5 minutes of the game starting, which honestly, like, I feel bad for Detroit. How many injuries could this defense possibly sustain? It's just not going to hold up against most teams, but especially not against Jaden Daniels. So, I mean, I do think that's interesting in terms of Jaden Daniels' ability to throw it downfield. Maybe that makes Austin Eckler even more palatable. Maybe that makes Olamide Zaccheaus even more palatable. And of course, Terry McLaurin and Zach Ertz. I think that makes things interesting. I'm gonna choose Washington though. I mean, they just keep scoring. So 21 implied total. I still think is too low. Maybe even in garbage time if they're getting blown out, which hopefully that's not the case. I think Jaden can put up some points there. Jalen Carter versus that backup tackle. Yeah, that's Trent Scott is going to be fun. Yeah, Sam Cosmi being out is not good. But this offensive line, Trent Scott's a veteran. Like this offensive line's been pretty good. It's been pretty good, but much better than, and that's partly because of Jaden Daniels. All right, I think that's it. Meg, any final thoughts before we get out of here? We'll be back in a couple of weeks to talk showdown in the Super Bowl, so don't forget that. But Meg, any final thoughts here?
No, I think we talked through a lot of it. Just I think build for those alternate game scripts if you're trying to be contrarian. And yeah, enjoy. We got 2 more fun weekends here.
Yeah, and Mike, before you give out your comment, Uwe2K, I mean, he makes a really good point here. He says, Mr. Najad. Okay. Stafford went off on that D last week. That's very true. Like, I mean, this defense, like, here's the thing about the Eagles defense. I don't think it's as good as we've been talking about over the last couple of months. I think it's great, but I like the fact that we've seen quarterbacks over the last 6 weeks really kind of not dominate the defense, but really find holes in this defense is telling. And that includes Matt Stafford last week in a game that the Rams easily could have won, in my opinion. Mike, any final thoughts?
Yeah, just don't be afraid to leave salary, especially receiving. Like if AJ Brown doesn't score a touchdown at 6,800, there's a good chance a $4,200 Hollywood Brown can outscore him. So there's a lot of ways to get different. And you don't have to be the team that you think is going to win to play. There's many scenarios where there's things that might sound and seem negatively correlated, but like the Eagles defense being good and picking off Jaden Daniels twice early in this game might be a great thing for Jaden Daniels fantasy scoring.
Yeah.
Right. So just a lot of things to think through, like always every week, but leave some salary on the table is the best way to get different here.
All right, we got 2 comments that I just have to read. One is from Rad Pav, who came in here late. Thanks for coming in at all. I appreciate everybody in here. Says, I came in here just to say go Birds to Sia and Meg. All right. I mean, we'll see how this turns out. Obviously, we're playing with house money here. As long as our king stays healthy going into next season, I'm looking very optimistic because, Mike, you made that comment about Washington. They've got, what, $90 million in cap space. I think they're like in the top 3 as far as cap space is concerned. So this is a team, as long as the quarterback stays healthy, and I always worry about that. We went through the RG3 experience 12 years ago. Things are looking up.
The future is bright. That's right.
Future is bright. Yeah. And then Lee Price says, appreciate it, enjoy. The best 4 teams are remaining. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was 44 minutes on just 2 games, but I thought we just attacked it from so many different angles, and that's what you have to do on a 2-game slate. Everybody, thank you for joining us. That's Mike McClure. We got Meg Shop. We got me, Sia Najad, and we've been bringing you FFT DFS all year. We still got a show to go before this season ends, so tune in for that. Meanwhile, have fun on Sunday watching Championship Weekend. Go Commanders, go Chiefs, I guess. That's what this show is going to be all about. Maybe the Commanders and the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. Hopefully. Ladies and gentlemen, have a great week and weekend. We'll see you next time on Fantasy Football Today, DFS.